or now. Good evening, guys and gals and non-binary pals. This is That D&D podcast, and we're back for another edition of our Improbable interview segment. Before we get to introducing our special guest, let us introduce ourselves and then let him immediately overshadow us. Let them immediately overshadow us. Sorry, I'm bad at that. My name's Aaron. She, her pronouns. Been here since the beginning, and I talk a lot and about dumb things. So, your turn, Zach.
Oh, is it me again? I feel like I'm trapped in a time loop. Like, are there dilithium crystals involved?
Hello, guys and gals and non.
It's Groundhog Day.
Because I'm from the future, you're experiencing some temporal weirdness.
That's awesome. I didn't even think about that. Hi, I'm Zach. I've been on these Improbable interviews before. I also play a lot of games with this podcast. I have not been here from the beginning. I am Johnny come lately. I've only been here for like 3 years now.
Of the 4.
Yeah. He, him pronouns, and I'm glad to see everybody made it back from the time stream.
Hi, Mike Jodarks, I'm Berard, he, him pronouns. I play some games, I've run some games. We all have a lot of fun.
Okay. And last but certainly not least, and actually the reason we're all here together tonight, Luke, why don't you give us a very long description of yourself and the things that you do and the several of the ways that you're awesome.
Hello, I am the non-binary pal.
Boom.
They, them pronouns. Okay. So, in my day job, I am a GM for children. That's how I make a living. I'm also a game designer. I don't make a living with that, but like I make some money, I guess. I am a cast member on a bunch of Twitch streams, mainly stuff with Ash McCowan, who you and your lovely audience have already met. She's wonderful. I also do a bunch of stuff with Eric Vulgaris, who is a good boy.
We will all meet him soon also. So
yeah. I have a podcast that I like creative direct and host, where we play role-playing games. I like to cook. I am theoretically qualified as both an anthropologist and an English literary critic, I guess, because that was what my degree was in.
Nice.
Important.
Yeah, I think that's like the important like main beats. My brand is spooky, sad, and sincere. Constantly, as a player, as a GM, as a designer, like all that shit. And then also sometimes I get grumpy.
Uh-oh. Cool. I see. We're adjusting my levels. Excellent. Thank you.
I'm taking listener feedback and doing things about it.
We should have put this mic
by the way,
frame.
Yeah, before we get started, we should shout out our boy Andrew, host of Candles in the Dark, who put in a lot of work on our overlay to make us look really nice, as he always does. So thank you for that.
Yes, without Andrew's tireless enthusiasm and willingness to make just dig us all out of the mud single-handedly, we'd still be in the mud, basically. That's a shitty analogy, but there you go. That's
Tubes full of spiders. We're all just tubes full of spiders tonight.
Okay. So, you said your day job is running RPGs for kids. First off,
yep,
that's rad as hell. So, A+. How did you? How?
Okay. I'm just gonna put down first. I'm just gonna establish a boundary. I recently had a promotion at work. Good job, me.
Nice.
As part of that, when I speak super directly about work, I am representing work, and so I'm not going to go into any specifics because
absolutely
want to have freedom to talk, to cuss and do things that are not befitting a representative of a children's service. So, this story begins in 2003 when I was a young elfling of 9 or 10, I don't fucking remember numbers. And my parents sent me along to attend a holiday program that runs role-playing games for children and young people.
Awesome.
Fast forward to 2018, and I work there. So, like, I started attending when I was, like, very young. I attended until I was 13. At that point, I started volunteering there, and, like, learning DMing stuff from the people who ran the place. When I was 16, I started working there as, like, an assistant, helping run stuff. When I turned, like, either 18 or 19, I don't actually remember anymore because it's so long ago. Like, they were like, good job, you're ready to run the thing by your, like, as the head person in the room now. 10 points, big thumbs up. In 25th, either 2014 or 2015, I started being paid to also write a bunch of the content that we run there. So that is a thing that I do now also. And then as of very recently, I am now the like day-to-day manager of that program.
Cool.
Yeah, and that's my day job.
That's very cool. That's very cool.
That's how you gotta get in really early and just hang around for a long time.
Came up through the program. I like it.
Yeah, that's the secret. Get your foot in the door early and then just don't fucking leave when they tell you to.
That's awesome. Well, go mom and dad, first of all. That's really cool.
Yeah, right. Like good 10 points to them. Good decision.
Was that how you got introduced to like RPG stuff?
Yep.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
It did break me a little.
Okay.
How so?
In that I once ran a day-long, day of the program, like a day-long tabletop session with meal breaks, with three other GMs for 36 children.
Wow.
Like a tabletop, like with the dice and shit, not a LARP. And so my sense of scale of player numbers.
What?
Just,
right? I'm like, because like frequently, because of the way that staffing ratios work, it's like, yeah, you got to run for 10 children. I'm like, cool.
awesome.
Jamming for 10 players at once? There's no big deal.
Yeah. They'll just all be goblins. It'll be fine.
Exactly.
That's great.
That makes me want to cry.
And these are all to kind of recap. You said you started at what age?
I would have been 9 or 10.
Okay.
The age cap has come down since, so it's basically 7 to 13-year-olds.
Okay.
And then some of the volunteering mob who are like in the kind of 13 to 16 age bracket, sometimes they don't come along as volunteers, they just come along to play.
Of course.
Yeah.
And so we've got some 15-year-olds in the room as well, which is nice, because then we can be like, mentor your fellow students and step up.
That was the thing I was going to ask, actually, because that's a fairly broad like developmental range, from 7 or 8 to 13, 15.
I mean,
sorry.
statistically speaking, like the overwhelming majority of them sit within 7 to 11.
Okay. I mean, that's still
Like,
a range, though. Like,
yeah, absolutely. But it's like, it's like clustered around the like 7 to 9. There's like a sizable minority of like 10 and 11s, and then there's like the handful of kids who hang on because they're really into it, even though they don't technically need like after school care or vacation, like holiday program care anymore.
Yeah, they're career track like you were, right? That's
pretty much. We've reinstituted that now, like in a kind of organized and supported way. Like that's all.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, because that's I was about to say something. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on there with like mixed stage play and peer mentoring stuff, and that's really cool. That's really cool. Do you find that you have to? I mean, I'm cheating a little bit because I did read your blog. Do you find that you have to like build your adventures differently when you're playing with 7-year-olds?
Yeah, I mean, we've got like a custom system that we built.
Okay.
Some years back, because and we're starting to come up against the veil, but like I'm gonna talk in generalities as long as I can. Like we do a combination of like buffer LARP, like you'll call it parlor LARP, I think, like talkie LARPs.
Yeah.
How do you call it? We have a completely different thing that we call it in Australia because we've been doing it since 1984. Anyway,
Okay.
so yeah, it's like a mixture of like we do some Buffalo stuff, we do some parlor stuff, we do some tabletop stuff, and like there is a system by which all of those things are integrated into the one overall experience.
Okay.
And yeah, like that when that system was designed, like, and as it has evolved since, yeah, like we definitely took into account like the developmental factors of children. And yes, as you will have read on my blog, I have made some observations over the years that lead me to have very strong opinions about how to write an effective role-playing game for children and why Dungeons & Dragons is actually the worst fucking choice you could possibly make.
No kidding?
It's got too many... the numbers are too big.
Mm-hmm.
There's too many abstract numbers you're trying to keep track of, and all of the options that you are asked to choose between are ones that you are asked to run probabilistic math on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas, like, you want intangibles so that they can't be directly compared. You just have to pick one that you like. Anyway, I have feelings.
Well, yeah, I found I thought, because my background's in education as well, so I found a lot of your insights on that to be very interesting to read. And I think some of them, while you were talking specifically about kids, I think that they can apply to the larger RPG design as well. Like the idea that there are choices that are just dead ends, or there's things that stop because you have no control over them, because you just missed the attack roll. And like, then the kid checks out. Well, it's also true of me playing a barbarian. Like, oh, I rolled a 3. I'm going to go like
nothing happens.
Get a hot dog and I'll be back.
It's bad design. It's bad, especially in a game like D&D where a combat round takes so long.
Yeah, it's like so long.
Like it's poor design. I'm sorry, Mike Merles, if you're watching this, I'm gonna crap on your game a bunch. It's not because I hate you personally, or that I hate D&D. It's just that I don't think D&D is very well designed.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm the kind of guy that will take swings at D&D as well. But at the same time, like, Mike Merle's got handed a thing that was like almost 30 years old at that point, and like had to make all of it work while not moving too far from it. That's a really big lift, right?
No, like Mike Merles is a lovely, lovely human being as far as I have tell. Like, I've never talked to him, but like as far as I can tell, he's very lovely and also very like smart and switched on, and like knows about John Harper's weird indie games, which like he's got some gamer cred in my eyes. Yeah. That said, I like controversial position. The best designed edition of Dungeons and Dragons was 4th edition.
But that's just correct.
Yeah,
because 4th edition is the edition of D&D that actually tries to be about what D&D is about in a mechanical way and stops like pretending that it's not about that thing. And no one could cope with having their delusions stripped away, and that's why they all backlash. Anyway, I'll stop talking about D&D now.
Nope.
I don't care for D&D. I play it once a month on a podcast with my dear friend Jimbles, and that is more than enough. To be honest, that's more than enough. I could do once every 2 months; it'd be better. Not about it.
Yeah, D&D was where I started. Like, I started in 4E, so I don't know any of the the earlier stuff. But I found after we went to literally anything else, it made going back. I mean, it's you can never go back home, that sort of thing. And we may have to hold this VOD until we actually solidify the date for the interview with Kate, because
just stop.
Her handlers may be watching. No,
I will say this for our potential future interviewee, Kate Welch. I have a lot of respect for anybody who steps up to the plate and is like, I'm going to try to help D&D, because it's a lift. It's a hard thing when something's been around that long, and many people have so many like marginally informed opinions on how it should be. And yeah, like the people working on D&D, like I've got my opinions on 5th edition, and I've got my opinions on all the editions of D&D, but like I have a ton of respect for anybody like wants to help do that thing.
Yeah,
because
like I shit on D&D because it's low-hanging fruit, and because I'm grumpy. But like, no one who designed that game is a bad person. They're all very fine designers, I'm sure. They were just working with a real bad situation. The only people in design I pity more are the Pathfinder designers.
Oh yeah,
who are in the same trap, but with a game that's even more rules clunky and even less able to shift from that plate. Like, oh boy.
Yeah, 100% there with you on that.
Like,
Pathfinder or White Wolf?
I just
Here we go.
White Wolf is. I'm gonna upset a bunch of my friends who are watching. White Wolf is bad, actually. Like, above and beyond any of my like longer term quibbles with it, did y'all see that one of the like character flaw things that your Brujar can gain in the Vampire Alpha was called Triggered?
Oh.
Like all of the like cringy, like racist. Does anyone remember? Shout out to anyone who remembers World of Darkness gypsies.
Mm-hmm.
Cool boy, that was a product that happened. Like all the like cringy, racist, homophobic, misogynist, like bullshit edgelord crap that's always plagued White Wolf at like not just a community level but a developer level, it seems is still alive and well in the year of our Lord 2K18. And I, shockingly, given the state of the world around us, have less patience for it than at any other point in my life. So, like, White Wolf, can we just flush that down the toilet?
Yeah. I mean, I played my fair share of White Wolf back in the day. Specifically, I was a werewolf player to the surprise of literally no one who's ever seen me play anything.
I'm so forsaken.
I started with Werewolf Wild West, actually.
Oh,
Wow.
interesting. Interesting.
But anyway, so yeah, like that, and I've known a lot of people who are really good with social stuff and being aware of intersectionalities and things like that, like the social awareness things that also super love White Wolf. But if you go back and you look at like it is 90s edgelord crap, the actual like stuff, and I have been kind of checked out because I'm like past White Wolf sort of as a thing that I want to play, and not that I'm holding it against anybody if they want to go back to it and are super pumped to pay for like $700 for the like luxury edition of the new vampire game. It's amazing. But yeah, if they're like if they haven't moved past that as a design or in the materials they're creating now, that does seem like a huge problem to me. Like that's
The
okay.
only White Wolf product in the last decade that I care for is Undying. And Undying isn't actually a White Wolf product.
Actually, I have Undying back here. I'm trying to find a way to like visually represent it properly and play it on stream because I think it would be a ton of fun.
One of my like white whale, very, very speculative like projects is doing for Werewolf what Undying did for Vampire.
Ooh,
because I think somewhere in the heart of Apocalypse's themes, there is a like workable, evocative game. It's just buried under a layer of 90s edgelord horse shit, not the best writing, and also just like a bunch of cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I feel like with a background in anthropology, I am like I wouldn't call myself the most qualified, but I'm more qualified than like the average Joe to like wade in there and be like, is there something here we can rescue and make good?
Extract
so, like,
and do
it'll probably never happen, but like sometimes I daydream. I'm like, yeah, that'd be really cool.
Yeah. No, Undying. Yeah, that was the first thing I thought of when I saw that the luxury edition, because I got an email for some reason. I'm on like White Wolf email lists, and like, oh yeah, we have the new edition up for pre-order. I'm like, okay, I'll go click, and I'm like, I paid, was it $20 for Undying, and like I can't imagine myself playing a different vampire RPG until I've like run the crap out of Undying because it seems like it's that good. Yeah. Or Urban Shadows. Urban Shadows is my other white whale that I really want to like see at the table. That also does White Wolf stuff better than I remember White Wolf doing White Wolf stuff. So, yeah.
That was a long and tangent-filled side avenue that we went down.
Look. We don't get to 3 hours by walking in a straight line. So
Left Turn, what's the best food-based role-playing game? Do we have one of those?
Oh boy. So there's a LARP where you play a bunch of like I don't remember it ever being like explicitly called out in the game, but like it's clear from context that you're Italian. Like immigrants. And half of you are like the older generation who like have childhood memories of the old country, and half of you are the younger players who don't have any memories of it. And how the LARP works is you taste the ingredients to make a tomato, like a marinara sauce, like individually. And I'm not a LARP facilitator, so like I read this document and I wasn't able to follow all of it, but like that tasting process somehow builds characters, ? And then the LARP is you all make tomato pasta together and then eat it together, pretending to be
A family.
a sad, bittersweet, intimately close Italian-American immigrant family.
Okay.
That's a pretty cool role-playing game with food in it. That's all I've got to say.
Wow, that was amazing.
Yeah, right? Like, I'd play the fuck out of that. I couldn't run it. But, like, I know a bunch of people who are, like, heavy into LARP design and could probably run it for me. I'm like, yeah, let's get on that shit. I'm gonna be an old nonna, and I'm gonna make the tomato pasta. It's gonna be good.
Zach, when you said a food-based RPG, for some reason my brain went to like cook, serve, delicious, and then like having somebody be, instead of a GM, it's like an inventory manager or something like that. And I've got ideas now.
It's blades, but they're kitchen knives.
There was a Google Doc I found like 10 years ago called 5-Star Chef. 5-Star Chef that mimics the Iron Chef process of role playing.
Fuck, I love Iron Chef.
Yeah.
Like, what a good show.
It
Someone
really is.
I saw a tweet yesterday, and someone was like, you know, best like dubbed anime of all time. And they had a list that included a bunch of like legit choices, like Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood. And then at the end of the list, and it was the one they'd starred, it was Iron Chef. Like, not an anime, but I agree.
Might as well be, yeah.
Phenomenal product.
Cookie Enemy has taken off recently, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there's a bunch. Oh God, I can't. There was one I watched. I can't remember what the hell it was called. And it was like you go to a school, and it's basically you Iron Chef people to climb the rankings in the school.
Was that Battle Chef Brigade? Because that sounds like a game that I watched people stream.
No, it's an actual show. I think it's called Food Wars or something, and like they go super into like they have the chef and they eat it, and like all of a sudden they just get hit by this wave from the ocean. It's like you can actually taste the salinity in the fish, and it's beautiful, and it's like the sun shining on them, and they're like, and the kelp, you could feel the chlorophyll. I'm like, oh my God.
Well, that sounds.
I really okay. I'm gonna find an index card. I really need to watch this show. Anime where they do Iron Chef for grades. Food Wars?
Oh wait,
Question mark? All right,
Binging
cool.
with Babish just did a thing on that.
Yes, okay, so it's Food Wars, and then the first word is Shokugeki, which I guess is Food Wars.
Oh, there you go. Food Wars, Colin Food Wars.
Yes, yes.
Yes,
Oh.
it's on like Crunchyroll or something. You owe it to yourself to watch it. It's ridiculous.
I'm a get on that shit. I will also. This perhaps is a controversial opinion because I'm speaking to a North American bunch of people. I don't particularly care for Iron Chef America.
I find it to be inferior as well.
Not only because it's inferior, but also because Bobby Flay is garbage.
Oh,
Right,
yes, absolutely.
right.
100%.
And just like spoil. Whereas like Alton Brown, you get 10 points for putting Alton Brown on the show. Love Alton Brown. Good eats, quality content.
I saw him live, and he's fantastic live too.
What a good boy. What a good boy. And like, you know, Masaharu Muramoto, love him, my good boy from the original Iron Chef. But like just Bobby Flay, it's like if you're making a dish and then you just like drop a spoiled oyster in it.
Well, it's like you go,
It doesn't matter how good the other ingredients are.
yeah.
I'm not gonna fucking eat that shit. Bobby Flay is that spoiled oyster.
Wow.
Well, it's like
Wow.
it's like you have this pile of like precious, like pristine ingredients, and you're like, what would Applebee's do with this? And then boom, that's the Bobby Flay dish.
The only Bobby Flay dish I willingly watch is Beat Bobby Flay because it
because
offers
he
me
loses all the
slim hope
time.
that I
Yeah.
might get to watch Bobby Flay get beaten.
Yeah, I'm watching.
And also
I'm
'cause
watching. Sorry, go
They
ahead.
sledge him constantly, and I'm just like, yes, crush him.
I'm in that show to watch Bobby Flay like get wrecked by this like the fire department like the chef the cook for the fire department making like hoagies or some shit and just own Bobby Flay. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's basically
It's the best.
they should have just called it Bobby Flay gives you a truck. Like, I think.
I just wanted to point out. I thought I remember this. I don't know if it comes over on thing. There's actually this is the Fate System toolkit. Hinted at it inside is the existence of a setting hack that is the Uranium Chef, which is apparently a futuristic version of the Iron Chef. That's the first thing I thought of when we started talking about that. So somebody at Fate headquarters was like, "This is a great idea for a game. We should tell people that's a thing." I don't know if it actually exists anywhere, but yeah.
Look, they get points. They get points even for an outline.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to you, Evil Hat.
It's true. God. Excuse me.
And that's the sign that it's time to move on. Segment over.
Yeah,
Here
built-in
come the
timer.
hiccups.
What do y'all do without me here? Because I mean, does one of you? Oh wait, does somebody else get the hiccups? Is that like there must
Yes.
always? Oh my god.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sort of like a mimetic virus Highlander / thing. It's weird.
Are
There
they?
must always be one.
Are the hiccups the
Speaking of
source of my
mimetic-
power? Continue.
Speaking of mimetic viruses, did any of y'all ever watch a movie called Pontypool?
That
Mm.
sounds
it's
familiar.
It's a zombie film,
Okay.
but the zombie virus is passed mimetically through sound, and it's set in the Canadian wilderness in a isolated radio broadcasting booth.
Okay.
It's a good movie.
Okay.
Wow.
Have you ever read the
I
book?
watched it at work.
Have you ever read the book Cell by Stephen King?
That is not one of Uncle Steve's works that I'm familiar with. no.
Okay, so basically, anybody who is using a cell phone anywhere in the world at a given time, something goes through and it basically rewires your brain, and you go like full crazy feral zombie mode. Except what they do, instead of killing everybody all the time, eventually they form this sort of like hive consciousness, and they start grabbing people, and instead of killing them, they basically line you up and they just hold a cell phone to your head, and then there's like more of you, and it's weird, but it was an entertaining
There's,
read.
like, more of you.
I was gonna say that sounds until the very end. That sounded like the spoiler alert. The very end of Dollhouse.
Mm.
I thought you were about to say the very end of the first Kingsman movie, where like they send the signal through their cell phones. I love that we've gotten so completely like off track from role playing games. We're just doing like media recommendations of the podcast.
And that's us too. But I was trying to segue into food, but that's good.
I know that's also fair.
Well,
As we talked about with John the very first night. Sorry, Aaron, I didn't mean to step
No,
on
go
you
for
there. As we talked about with John the very first night, like media recommendations are about role playing games, right? This is the ludography that we're all working
This
from.
is very true. Shout out to John Harper for being right about that thing. I came to a realization today in conversation with a friend, just like before I came on the air. I don't care for genre anymore. As a design tool, I think it's like, who the fuck has ever sat down to say, I'm going to make a fantasy role-playing game or a horror role-playing game, and just been like, yep, that's all I need to know.
and that part is done.
Like,
Let's
it
move
doesn't-
on to the next
It
bit.
tells you nothing about what you're designing. Even if you say a subgenre words, it still tells you nothing about what
Right.
you're designing. Like, I was hanging out with Andrew, who
Mhm.
you all met, and who is a very lovely, incredibly intelligent human being,
Mhm.
doing design work on one of my games the other day. And well, actually, this conversation was a while back. This was a couple of months back. And I was like, yeah, like, they were like, what's your game about? And I'm like, oh, it's like low fantasy. They're like, cool. What do you mean by that? Because like, there's like such a
Yeah.
vast spectrum of possibility in that. And I'm like, huh. Like, whenever we say genre describing buzzwords at each other, we're basically just lazily falling back on them to avoid having a conversation about what we actually mean.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like when we say Dungeons and Dragons is a fantasy role-playing game, we're just lazily and/or marketingly stepping back from saying like what specific, like, you know, Dungeons and Dragons is a game about a specific brand of fantasy that involves dungeon crawling and is like fairly colonialist and like bunch of other assumptions and like totally anti-medieval actually in a whole bunch of its assumptions. And so like when I write games, often I write them in that space. I'm never like, today I will write a fantasy. I'm like, here is a very weird, specific niche thing that happens in fantasy novels. I'm going to write a game about that niche thing.
Mm-hmm.
The genre of this game is weird, fantastical sea voyages. That's a genre now. But, like, it's at the point where, like, it's meaningless to call it genre. Like, I write games about weird, fantastical sea voyages, actually, is what I do. And so, like, yeah, I just think genre is not... It's not a particularly useful tool in the writing process, or really in the pitching to people process either, because it just lets them project a bunch of assumptions onto it, and then neither of you is communicating what you actually are talking about.
That's fair.
That's me.
Yeah,
that's my feelings.
That's super cool and insightful. I need to roll back to the weird the weird sea voyages.
Fantastical
Okay.
sea voyages.
Weird fantastical sea voyage, because there were many very insightful words after that, but I was like, oh, tell me more.
Yeah, so there is this thing that happens in fantasy novels, and the place I came at it from is I was like, this thing happened in the Chronicles of Narnia. Like, basically all of Voyage of the Dawn Treader is this thing. And that is my favorite of the Narnia books, apart maybe from The Last Battle. And, like, I'm one of those people who read those books before it was spoiled to me that they're basically just Christian allegory. And so, like, I retain some fondness for them deep in my heart. And so I'm like, cool, that's a thing I really enjoy. And then there's also this thing that happens in a Wizard of Earthsea. That's like, I want to say the last like quarter of the book, like everything that happens past when Vetch and Ged, spoilers for Wizard of Earthsea, like everything that goes from after they leave Vemish or whatever island it is that Vetch lives on, and like out to the end of the book. And then there is a similar bit in The Farthest Shore that happens right up until they get to the shores of the dry land. So, like, Le Guin also does this, like, weird, surreal, fantastical sea voyages, and, like, they meet the whale people, and, like, it's really cool, and then, like, they go past a spooky island, and then, like, the bit at the end of The Wizard of Earthsea where, like, the water is suddenly solid like sand because this, like, weird, otherworldly landscape is being projected onto it, and Ged has the whole confrontation with his shadow. It's like, both of these things, I'm like, damn. That's a really cool, incredibly hyper-specific thing I'm really into. And then I stopped and thought about it, and I'm like, actually, and this is a broader thing, because, like, there is a whole genre of, like, early Irish Christian-influenced mythology that just is that thing, where, like, saints go on weird sea voyages to America in the 3rd century in boats that are made of cauldrons and have weird adventures. Like, that's a whole subgenre of Irish mythology, and I'm like, I'm gonna write a game about that.
I mean,
and so I wrote
yes,
I wrote a game about that, and that was the first game I had ever published. And so it kind of just from that point, that is my process. I'm like, what's like a super weird like niche thing or idea? Like, what if you could play trees? What if this was a game where you were trees, but like not ants? Like, you're not talking trees and you're walking, you're just literally trees. What would a game where you play trees be like? And so I wrote a game where you play trees. It's kind of like The Quiet Year, but it's also kind of like Firebrands. It's a strange game.
we will have to add it to our backlog. It's like every time we have somebody on, I feel like our backlog grows by like 6 or 7 games.
It does.
And I have a problem with moving on from some games, and oh, gee, excuse me. Okay, so kind of looping way back to like right at the beginning. You were
Okay.
playing running games for kids. Do you feel like they bring something different kind of to the table than adults do, as far as their expectations for things, or the way they address problems, or anything like that? Or has it been pretty similar?
I'm gonna say no, because and now I'm getting like wildly off track. As a childcare professional, I don't believe in the arbitrary binary of children and adults, and like there is this deeply enshrined cultural belief that goes back to the Victorians, and the like children are like sinless little angels, like made in a different way than we are. And like it informs a lot of the weird censorship that the Brothers Grimm, along with their misogyny, which also informed that censorship, that the Brothers Grimm put into all of those fairy tales they collected. Like, yeah, this idea of like perfect, unspoiled, like angelic children as like a separate and special category. And I just like that's some grade A horse shit right there. Children are just people who are smaller than us.
Oh yeah.
And like different than us in a bunch of ways, sure, but like there's no inherent like virtue of difference between children and adults. And so I just reject any notion that smacks of like, yes, like it's different playing role-playing games with children than it is with adults. I'm like, it's not, because it's just playing role-playing games with people. The people are just slightly different.
Right, that makes sense.
Now that I've got that out of the way, like, so proviso, right? All of that. Yeah, I think there are some differences, but I also think just like children vary so wildly, both from one another in temperament and outlook and feelings, and also developmentally, even within like a bracket of like, you know, when we talk about developmental brackets, like it is necessarily a flattening of a curve, and like to talk about what is appropriate for 7 to 9 year olds, like inevitably there will be kids who are dragging, and there are kids who are like ahead, and so like kids are just so wildly varied, bringing it back like all people are.
Whoa.
That I just don't think you can meaningfully make like overarching statements of that kind. I will say they are less likely to get caught up in mechanical minutia.
Okay.
But that's just because at a developmental level, they are less equipped to engage with it at all.
That makes sense.
Yeah. They just don't have the schema and the context to make sense of everything, right?
Yeah, thinking and like making connections with abstract objects is really tricky. This is why like any game that's like you have a hit point, I'm like, this is not a child appropriate game. Because that's not meaningful to them. That's not, you can't connect with that. That's why you give them little tokens. And then you take away their tokens as they get hurt. And then they feel the loss and they can relate to it.
I made a very bare bones kind of RPG for my two sons.
That's incredibly gay. I just want to put that out there.
So they were asking what I was up to when they went to sleep, you know, what games I was playing with my friends. And I was like, oh, we're playing role-playing games, and you roll dice, and like you go on adventures and stuff. And both of them immediately were like, we want to do that. So I had like, I don't know where the sheets went, but we had like character sheets, and there's only like 3 or 4 stats, and basically it was set in the Mario universe, and they had to go save Mario and Luigi, and they had little question mark blocks they could flick, and like items would come out, and they had the items they could give to other people, and it was it warmed my heart, and seeing them like engage with stuff just made me so happy.
Yeah, making stuff tangible is super important. Like kids need to be able to touch things to interact with them meaningfully in a role-playing game context. Like if they have resources, you need to like make them graspable with their sticky little hands.
Why are they always sticky?
When you say go wash your hands, they don't.
Well, or they find something sticky on the way back from doing so.
This is why you have to accompany.
Sticky little pockets with.
Why you like stand over them with a tea towel and you're like, all right, now wash your hands. Now dry your hands on the tea towel. Now go get afternoon tea. I'm watching you.
So I would just like to. There's a couple things I would like to jump back to, but I want to piggyback on a point that you just made about the like physicality and the use of like tools and props for kids in RPGs. I think, other than those of us who have been doing it forever, I think that also applies to adults, as you have so adroitly pointed out that kids are not some special case of human, right? We're all that way. It's just that, like, as you get older and you have more context and you have more stuff in your head to put other stuff into, you can figure out more stuff in your everyday life, right? But as you get older and as you become more adults, a lot of times, and it's not true for us, but it's true for a lot of people, you get further from the making up stuff with my brain to have fun with, and pretending to be things that I'm not actually. And so if you have someone who's coming to role-playing games sort of later in life, right? Like they're a continuing education role player, right? You have to like pull them back in, and giving them those tools is also super useful. Like that's like education 102. Like, here, have things for them to have so that they remember stuff is like really important. It's like human psychology. So yeah.
No, like a lot of the stuff I say about like running games for kids is also like piggybacked into it are a lot of my like best practice.
Oh no.
Uh-oh. The tube filled up with spiders.
Luke!
Luke,
No.
come back.
This has been a night of, let's call them hiccups.
The tube spiders.
It's a term that
The
I
tube
am
spiders.
very familiar with.
Are we
There we
back?
I think so.
We missed you
I think
terribly.
so.
There we go.
Was that me or Twitch? I can't tell.
Well, we all lost you, so
We're
I
not
don't
going to
know.
blame you, so damn you, Twitch.
No, it's the tube spiders. We have since slain the tube spiders.
Well,
And
they flocked somewhere
It like
else.
it probably just is my laptop being a shit. Like
oh,
Okay, so we were saying
yeah, you're saying something about your best practices with.
yeah, are we live again? I can't tell.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay,
I don't know
hello,
if we ever
viewers.
stopped being live. You just went away for a minute.
Okay, I just disappeared. Hello, I'm back now. But yeah, like a lot of the advice I give on like here is how to run games well for children. I'm like, also just here is how to run games well and design them. Do the thing. Like, and not even in the sense that I'm like pushing an agenda, but just like necessarily the things I am going to like latch onto and be like, here are things that are important for you to do, like are things that I value. So like there's no the like secret conspiracy where I'm like, yes, all of my GMing for children advice is actually just me telling you how to GM. Haha. It's just like the things I think children should be that you need to do to help children play role-playing games effectively are also things you should be doing to help everyone you play games with play games effectively. Actually,
Yeah,
this is good.
yeah. That was one of the things.
Games are good, actually.
Games are good. Games are cool. Don't be a jerk. This is like these are the two most important rules. Games are fun.
Yeah.
Don't be a jerk.
It's sad how many people don't know or care about those two very simple things. Like,
Especially Rule 2.
yeah, like,
There's a sad number of people who fine with Rule 1, but like...
it's so easy to not be a shithead. Like, you just think of a thing, and if you say, hey, would a shithead do this? You just don't do it.
Yeah,
But like,
it's
at the
hard
same
to turn
time-
away.
yeah, at the same time, I think like it's also really important to acknowledge that like learning to be less toxic human beings and like unlearning misogyny and like racism and homophobia, like it's fucking work. It is hard work that requires a lot of self-awareness, that requires a lot of courage, that requires just a lot of like mind numbing, just like keeping it in the forefront of your mind, constantly catching yourself on it.
Training
Mhm.
practice.
And like, yeah, it's not
That's-
like it is. it is conceptually easy, but in practice, it is like a lifelong skill to acquire.
Yeah, I think that a lot of times it would. And for me specifically, like with my background, I've come a long way into being a non-shit human, but I sort of started behind the line a ways, just because of where I was from and who I come from. And so, like, there's been a lot of stuff going on here in the United States with specifically like people going back and finding stuff that people said or wrote down. It's in like a blog or something where they were still a shitty person about something and bringing it back up. And I am trying to get better. I acknowledge the fact that I'm often not perfect. But I was very, very much worse, and I'm not ashamed that I was worse. I'm happy and proud that I'm getting better. I seek opportunities to do so. And I think that one of the issues that we sometimes run into is people either trying to pretend they were always perfect and not being perfect, or people not allowing other folks. And this is a really rough one because it's really hard to know when somebody makes a mistake, how do you react? Like if it hits you emotionally when somebody makes a mistake about you somehow, or when somebody's being a shithead to you, like acknowledging, understanding that they are not, maybe hopefully not going to be a shithead eventually, doesn't really help right then because they're being a shithead. So like I personally benefited greatly from getting slapped down by people who I was a shithead to and be like, no, that's wrong, be better. And so yeah, that's rough. It's rough and it takes a long time to unlearn. And I don't know that like it's hard because I don't want to say, oh, we should cut people some slack, because we shouldn't. We should like wreck them up about it. But we need to acknowledge that like it's hard and they might still come around. It's weird. This whole thing is a thing that I think about a lot because I'm working hard on a long-term basis to not be a shithead.
I think a lot of it is about, this is me speaking for myself, not for other queer people, not for all non-binary people. This is just like me as me. I feel like receipt culture in this regard is really unhelpful. Like, I think calling people out, like, you know, like loudly and insistently and asserting our boundaries in the present tense is really good. But I feel like looking back at how people were 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I question how productive that is, because a lot of the time, people who are making an effort to improve and irredeemable shitheads, 10 years ago, it is very difficult to tell the difference in the archaeological evidence. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, the people who are trying to get better now and were irredeemable, or were seemingly irredeemable shitheads back then, like, that Venn diagram does cross over. Like, it's possible that I was an irredeemable, like, specifically, and this is kind of a one that's a little directly pertinent now, like, I had no idea what a trans person was until, like, the year before I moved out of Philadelphia, like 6 or 7 years ago. Like, I was getting better on the other stuff, but I'd never run into that, and I'd never thought about it. And then there was this like controversy in Philly of a trans woman being denied entry to a bus because she was misgendered on her bus pass, and and it blew my mind that was a thing. I'd never, and so like since then I feel like I've come a long ways, and I've tried really hard to get better at that stuff. But like, yeah, like 2012 Zach, no fucking clue. Like, and between now and then, here I am. So,
yeah, and so I think like, yeah, this culture of like combing through the past history of people to like rake them over the coals for things that they did, like, I think also there's degrees and there's levels. Like, if someone is running for public office and like used to be a major racist shitheel 30 years ago, right? That is relevant. Hello, Donald Trump. How you doing? But like, you know, like individual people who are trying to improve, like calling them out because like, yeah, you said like in like specific citation of like misogynistic thing like 10 years ago on a forum. It's like, how is that productive? What about that is remotely a productive use of anyone's time, really?
Yeah. I mean, and again, to make sure we drive home the point, if they do that now, fucking nail them.
Oh, God,
like,
no, like
wreck them up, right? But yeah, like I am really like we didn't have, my family didn't have a computer until after I'd left for college. Like I didn't have a personal computer or regular access to the internet until like 2006 or something like that. And like, thank God, because I did not leave any sort of electronic trail of like my journey from rural person who doesn't know anyone who's openly not like me, right? And to like, okay, I'm living in the city, I'm meeting people who aren't like me. These people are pretty okay. It's going to be fine. But that period with Zach is it's undocumented according to the world. And that's not true for most people now. Like that's the people who were like around and alive and interacting with the internet between the years of like 2000 and 2012 probably said some shitty things, and that has to be okay if they're going to operate in society now. Just don't let them keep doing it.
Yeah, and that's advocacy 101 with Luke. Focus on the present tense.
So can I kind of want to ask a question, like kind of springboard off that. Like, what do you think of as play as practice? Because I think of my kids and I want to like try to prepare them for situations where they need to be able to be, assertive in those ways, which is not culturally ingrained a lot of the time. And it is something that needs to be learned. So like one of the things that I've been thinking about was like, why not like a role-playing game or something that I can play with my kids?
Yeah, no, totally. It's a tricky one because like people always want to leap from games have like certain specific kind of potential in that area to like games are the answer to all of our problems. Like Austin Walker, who y'all had a wonderful interview with, and who is a very, very like intelligent and incredible human being. His talk at like the New York Public University, games will not save us.
Yeah.
Like Austin was like on some fucking fire because like, yeah, games will not save us. Games, I'm in a state of flux about whether games can teach empathy. Like that is a claim that we hear made like an awful lot in the RPG space. I'm not sure how I feel about it at the moment. But in terms of like, yeah, like role-playing is pedagogical like technique. I mean, like fucking absolutely. Like there is a reason that EMTs do it. There is a reason that firemen do it. There's a reason that like police folk do it. And so like, yeah, like I think in terms of like, yeah, preparing our kids for school or preparing them to deal with peer pressure, or even just like as human beings ourselves, like practicing being assertive with our boundaries, or like as is like documented both like, in an academic context and also by word of mouth, like trans folk like trying on and experimenting with like identity before they're ready. Right? Like whether that's in more PGs, whether that's in tabletop games, whether that's on Second Life, where I know that was like a massive thing. Like WoW, there's a whole phenomenon there historically. And so yeah, like I think games as practice, like I think is a really strong thing and is a thing games are really well equipped for. Games as empathy engines, I have some questions. And like games as the saviors that will help us redeem the white supremacists and the TERFs and the like rampant like the incels of the world. Like I don't believe it. I just don't think it's gonna fucking happen. I don't think it can.
Well,
games are not that answer. Yeah.
Well, that's a horse to water thing. I don't know if that's you lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, right? Even if those tools do exist inside tabletop role playing games, where yes, you can totally be a different kind of person and you can see things from their perspective and maybe gain some empathy from that. You have to opt into that and not opt into playing big muscular dude with an axe that smashes stuff. I say as the guy currently playing a big muscular dude with an axe that smashes stuff.
I think even further than that, like, I also think there is a mistaken assumption that gets made that is like, if we can only teach these people empathy, problem solved, right? And this goes back to the question of work. Because they don't just have to like be like, oh shit, trans people are people and like their experience is valid. And oh my god, we should believe them when they say things are shitty and so like they don't just have to have those realizations, which like again, like maybe games can help with that kind of empathy, but like they then have to proceed to put in the exhausting, like never-ending work of unlearning a bunch of toxic shit. And games are not a shortcut that can help with that. And that is the important part of the process that I feel always gets overlooked in favor of like the easy ideological victory of like, this person accepts that, you know, gays are people now. It's like, great. That's step one. That's not, let's throw a fucking party.
Yeah.
When the work begin.
Yeah.
And the role-playing games aren't like a fucking cheat code that makes that work any easier or take any less time or require any less,
Yeah, I mean, like you know, you were saying you can't force them to play the games that may help in some small way. I mean, just look at the BattleTech thing and all the people who are basically boycotting it because a trans person existed within like 300 miles of the creation of the game, and it's just like, y'all, come on, just could you?
I also like am uninterested in people. I'm uninterested in forcing those people to do it. I was having a conversation about this on DC Dungeon Commanders Discord the other night. It started with me talking about how I don't have a lot of time for the Adventure Zone. I just like personally I'm uninterested in it. And then it wandered far afield into many places. And I want to come back to that first bit because I noticed an interesting thing while having that conversation. But one of the things that we talked about as part of that conversation is, oh god, I feel like I've lost my train of thought. What was I even talking about? Oh yeah, right. Was the idea of like wrong fun and like right, like good fun and bad fun and playing games right and playing games wrong and all that. And like perhaps it is an unpopular position, but like I do think you can play games wrong. Both like individual specific games. I kind of feel like that's an undeniable fact. I feel like if you play Apocalypse World and you do not follow the agenda, you do not follow the principles, and you don't pay any attention to the move list, like you are fucking playing the game wrong, full stop. Like you just are. But also like games in general, I kind of feel like anyway. And so like as part of that, like I would rather like as a queer person, like and a non-binary person, like the idea of a bunch of straight, white, cishet, like privileged normative men picking up Monster Hearts and deciding to play it as Mean Girls rather than engaging with any of the queer content that is loaded in it and that is clearly intended to be there, and just like ignoring, like, for instance, the way that Turn Someone On is designed to work. Like the idea of them doing that, like, is like deeply angering to me. Like, as a privileged, like, I don't want privileged people to take games written by authors in a position of as a minority about their experience and like
chop shop
willfully play those games wrong.
Yeah.
If you do that, go fuck yourself. You are having wrong fun and you are playing a game wrong, and like I just have no time for you. And like grr, right? Like that one gets my hackles up. That one like oh, I'm mad about it. And so how did I get onto this tangent?
Don't add-
BattleTech, they them pronouns, DC.
Yeah, right.
Discord.
And so like I would rather those people fucked off and didn't engage at all if they're going to engage in bad faith and they're going to be shitheads. Like I would rather that group of normative straight white men not play Monster Hearts at all if the alternative is them playing Monster Hearts in a way that is like a betrayal of and a rejection of its ethos and its design intentions and like the lives of the people that it is about.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
That's just me.
No, I feel you.
Can I interrogate that a little bit? Because I don't disagree.
Absolutely.
I'm curious to see where you're at on that.
I am an open book.
Excellent. I love those. I have so many of them. So the question I have immediately is, as a white cishet normative dude, right? If I were to grab like 4 of my white cishet normative dude buddies, and we were to play Monster Hearts, and we were to just not get it.
Yeah, here are the questions. And so I feel like on the one hand, like part of designing a game like that effectively is articulating it. And like if we're looking at examples, right, like Monster Hearts, particularly the second edition, is even more explicit than the first ever was about like about the themes and the ways in which the game is queer and the statements it mechanically makes about sexuality and why it makes them. Like Avery says a lot of this shit really upfront. It's like, one, there's that, like part of that is on the designer to like articulate clearly, and the other part of that is that like there is like, we live in the age of Twitch and the internet and like the Twitter RPG, like there is like endless amount of resources out there, like at your fingertips to like, if you don't understand why Monster Hearts is designed the way it is and you feel like you're not getting it, like there are people you can ask. And also the fact that you are aware that you're not getting it disqualifies you from the category of douchebag I described. Because like if people don't get the game, like that's one thing. That's fine. That's okay. It's people who like see the way that the turn someone on move in Monster Hearts works, and the first time it comes up and play like, oh no, my character's straight, it just doesn't work. And the table culture is like, yeah, cool, we're just gonna house rule that. Fuck those people, right? Because like at that point you are like playing the game in not only bad faith with each other, sort of, and like the designer and the design intent and the mechanics of the game and all the stuff that we usually mean by bad faith, like you are playing Monster Hearts in bad faith with like queer people who are the people it is written about and for and to honor and to uplift. And like, yeah, like at that point you're being a real shithead.
I want to play Monster Hearts.
Okay.
Hey, look, and you want to hit me up sometime. Hit me up. I've got some experience at the moment. And also, I never know how to talk about this because like it always feels slightly weird. I was involved in the design process for the second edition.
Yeah.
My name is in this book. It's quite exciting.
Ooh.
It's still kind of fucking surreal, to be honest.
I can understand that.
Like,
it's real cool.
Avery Alder and I like talked about Monster Hearts. Like, what the fuck? And like, great. I wasn't an enormous amount of help, but like, I did my bit. I had some stuff to say. I'm proud of that.
Nice.
To go back to the Adventure Zone thing, because I want to go back to that.
Yes.
I realize there's a really weird thing that happens, and because I realized after this conversation that it had happened, where I say I don't care for the Adventure Zone. I think it's unambitious, and it's kind of mediocre, and it doesn't highlight the hobby at its best and with the potential it has. And people hear that as me saying, these people are playing role-playing games wrong, their fun is bad. Because there's a really weird blurred line in content creation in RPG spaces Because on the one hand, these are people playing a role-playing game, and all fun is good fun, and there's no right or wrong way to play a game. Again, I don't actually agree with these statements, but that's the normative position. But on the other hand, these people are creating content, they are creating fiction, and in the same way that I can say, cool, Breaking Bad, like, I have some critical opinions on Breaking Bad as a piece of media, I absolutely can say I have some critical opinions about the Adventure Zone as media, and some of those observations include, from a technical standpoint, the like quality of and the employment of role-playing games as a technology in it is not very good. Like, that is a critical feedback that like is a totally normal critical feedback thing to say about any other kind of media.
Yeah.
We just exist in RPG space in this really weird blurred space where like I say the latter and people hear the former.
Yeah.
And get like weird and defensive about it, and are like, it sounds like you're being gatekeepy, and I'm not trying to tell anyone how to play here. Like, they're making a product, and I am talking about that product, like, and the ways that it represents the like us as a community. Like, it's a strange thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's basically me done with that tangent. I just wanted to talk about that because it frustrates me. And I feel like
fair.
I feel like it is important that we be able to, like, in the same way that we can talk about, like, because no one seems to have issues with us lauding good content, right? Like, whenever we talk about RPG content from, like, in a positive light, like, whenever I talk about how, like, nuanced and how, like, really thoughtfully done, like, the Roll20 Presents Burning Wheel game is, or, like, whenever I talk about how impressed I am by, like, how incredibly, like, collaborative the Friends at the Table crew are, like, no one gets confused or objects to that. But, like, as soon as we start, you know, like, leveling critique, people's hackles get up in a really weird way. And like, it's a contextual stuff. I totally agree with John in chat that like it sure can look gatekeepy, and part of it is you just need to be like, the person expressing this just needs to be really careful about how it is framed. But I also think, like, as a hobby, and as a hobby where content creation is increasingly a part of what we do and a thing that we do, I think if we are going to progress, at some point a detangling of those things is going to have to happen.
Yeah.
Because while we remain stuck in a place of no critique can ever be leveled without being couched in 10 layers of, like, let me be very clear about what I am and aren't saying first. Like, as long as we stay in that space, critique can't really happen, and the improvement of the kinds of content that we're producing isn't really going to happen.
Yeah. I feel like the historical context on that is a very important thing. Like people telling other people that they're role playing games wrong, like they're playing these things wrong, is not only is it a tradition that's really bullshit in this hobby, right? Like being judgmental about how somebody else is playing a game, but it's also a cudgel that factions within this hobby will use against other factions in this hobby when they get into fights about it. So, but critiquing the product being produced, critiquing the like entertainment material that you are making is different than critiquing how you play a game and how you enjoy yourself. And that's, there has to be that separation there. It's not one and the same. It's not enough that you are having fun to entertain the people at home. There has to be a distance there when you're producing a product, essentially.
Yeah, like the point at which you started exposing like other people to the game that you are playing, like, is the point at which it stops being a one-layered exercise. It is now like, by dint of there being an audience, it is now a two-layer exercise.
Yep.
I also think it's really funny, really, really funny that, like, at least in indie spaces, which are like by tabletop standards, like fairly diverse ones. I feel like a lot of our hesitance around this and a lot of the historical context there is because, yeah, there is this ongoing problem of like gatekeeping that is often wielded as a bludgeon against women and queer people. And like it in the moment, it seemed incredibly strange to me. And I was like, this is so weird that people are feeling the need to defend 4 white, cis-het, privileged dudes with an existing fandom against me, a queer, non-binary person, critiquing the product that, like, even if this was a matter of me telling them that their play is wrong, like, who is the one with, like, power and privilege in this situation?
Mm-hmm.
And, like, why exactly did the McElroys need to be defended against my disapproval of the fun they're having? Like, it's a very strange space, and I feel like that what was a good instinct that, you know, like, played a really important role in cutting out a lot of gatekeeping shit against women, particularly because that's where we've seen a lot of strides, but also against people of color who, alas, you know, like, not as well represented in the hobby. Like, what was a really good instinct there has become like a culturally enshrined reflex, actually, in a really uncritically examined way that I think is actually really unhelpful.
Yeah. I mean, there's also, it's not to be ignored that there are also people like the Battletech shitheads that will totally weaponize that impulse as well, right?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Because
not everyone involved is playing in good faith, right?
Oh, yeah,
Exactly,
absolutely.
exactly.
No.
There are people who do come to it in good faith and just are not right when they do it, but there are people who are coming from it to it in bad faith and are just ready to swing that stick. And it's important to sort of differentiate between those people, even if, like, in the moment they're not actually that different, right? Like, it's weird. It's weird that way.
But yes, the moral of the story is, so here's the other thing. The other reason I get really, I'm trying to think of a right word here. Grumpy. Let's go with grumpy. The other reason I get so grumpy about, like, the cultural stranglehold that the Adventure Zone and Critical Role have on the D&D streaming space, that Wizards is increasingly leveraging for itself over the streaming space. The other reason I get really grumpy and pissy about that is because, like, lo and behold, let's look at the fucking demographics of the people producing that, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, let's look at the number of people hailing the Adventure Zone as, like, the fucking pinnacle of role-playing compared to the number of people saying the same thing about, like, Friends at the Table, which, like, if I put on, chat, my content production critique hat,
Doink.
is a better quality product on almost every level, and, like, yet, like, Friends at the Table is so much more slept upon. Like, G with a queer biracial man as its host. I wonder why.
Yeah.
God, Friends at the Table is so good.
It's really good.
Friends at the Table is really good. Also, I'm really bored. Mackle boys. Like, I love you, but just, like, would it kill you to get some fucking diversity on the show?
I know it's, you know, at least the original intent was, you know, brothers playing a game with their dad or whatever, but
yeah,
at least, I don't know, maybe consult some people, because I know they were doing, like, I have completely checked out when I heard that, we're going to be trying a few different, game rule sets or whatever, and having a different person running it, and I'm just going to play, like, basically like a First Nations person who is also can, like, transform into this thing and is also, like, a lady. And I was like, hey, maybe don't do that.
Maybe especially don't in a context where you've never fucking had a person of color or a woman on your show.
Yeah.
Sorry, not sorry.
But
I think,
you know.
Oh, sorry, Aaron.
No, I mean, John just said in chat that, it doesn't have to be, the McElroy show doesn't have to be everything. It can be just their thing. We need more shows. And I agree with that. And I think part of it is that, and, like, Critical Role and things. I think it was Eric Vulgaris who said it. It's basically like the porn of tabletop games. It's like you're getting completely unrealistic expectations, and like
It's super edited.
Yeah, I was super inspired by I forget what the other one was, but like it was like Friends at the Table and some other stuff was like what inspired me to do it. It's hard to get anything even near that quality, and you know, if you go into it with the expectations, it's like, all right, we're going to get this done on the first try. Everything's going to be great. We're never going to have a technical hiccup. All the audio is going to be perfect. We're going to have this like deep and engaging storyline that, you know, it just seems effortless. Like that's not what it is.
Yeah, like give me a moment. Jason, I see you in chat. I want to come back around to my podcast in a moment because this is relevant. But before that, I had a thought, and I'm just trying to remember what it was. And it was about the Adventure Zone. Oh yeah, the other thing about the Adventure Zone and Critical Role, like, to be honest, to a lesser extent, that I find really hard, like, again, personally, as content to consume, to engage with, is that they both seem, particularly the Adventure Zone, to fall within the general, like, Marvelification of, like, the entertainment industry, by which I mean to say, no real stakes, no permanent sense of consequence, nothing to say.
Yeah.
Come fight me, Disney. Infinity War was terrible. And so, like, yeah, like, if your role-playing game content doesn't have those things, if real things aren't at stake and loss isn't actually on the table, if, like, consequences aren't fucking real, and if you're not actually trying to say, like, at least something, then, like, I don't have time to consume more bland, boring, white bread, mediocre media anymore. Because, like, Marvel, I've had my fill. Marvel has filled me up. I don't have time for any more. I would like something different now, please. And yeah, like, everything I've heard secondhand about, like, the way that the McElroys run Apocalypse World, for instance, not Apocalypse, but, like, Powered by the Apocalypse, is that, like, they're super, super hesitant and bullshit about, like, the idea of, like, hard moves and the idea of, like, any actual, like, irrevocable shift in gameplay state or, like, any actual permanent consequences. And I'm like, if you are not doing those things, you are playing a Powered by the Apocalypse game. And here we come back to me telling people how to have fun. If you are playing a Powered by the Apocalypse game and your hard moves are not irrevocable and permanent, you are playing Powered by the Apocalypse wrong. Because that is one of its defining characteristics.
Yeah, it's like the syndicated sitcom where everything resets at the end of every episode and you come back to it, right?
Exactly.
That's exactly the opposite of what they're trying to do with those rule sets.
Yeah, if your hard move amounts to and then at the end of, like, the end of the sitcom or the end of, like, a Monster of the Week show, like, episode, like, everything goes back to normal and nothing has lasting consequences, if that's all your GM hard move is, like, I'm sorry, you didn't just make a hard move. Like, sorry, not sorry, you did it wrong.
Yeah.
If your hard move in Monster of the Week does not blow up at least one hospital, then
I don't know if any hospitals need to be being blown up. Like, you can just, like, make revelations that upset people and, like, change
this person and this person hard moved a hospital to death.
I did some things. I was basically working for Hydra. We discovered at right about that point.
That sounds appropriately irrevocable. I'm going to take a quick moment to get caught up on chat. Give me a moment. I just need to, like,
absolutely.
Do we want to take a 3-minute bio break or quick?
No, I'm good. I'm just like, this is not long. I'm like, good. Okay, yep, good. Thank you. That's a good example. Ash, hi, Jason. Wonderful. Okay, cool. I'm caught up. Yeah, thank you, Ash. Buffy spoiler. If Joyce doesn't die, the move isn't hard enough. Which, like, yeah, compare and contrast to a bunch of, like compare and contrast Buffy and Supernatural.
Yeah.
No,
right? We're like, oh, I killed a Winchester. That's not a hard fucking move because we all know it's not gonna fucking stick. It's the same as literally any character death in a Marvel movie because we all know it's not fucking real and you don't mean it, you cowards. Sorry, I really didn't like Infinity War. And then I read a Film Crit Hulk essay about it, and now I got even more like annoyed, and I just it's bad.
I tried to cover my ears and I pushed my headphones further onto my head.
It was worse.
I'm not. Yeah, I don't. Has everyone seen it? I'm not sure.
Nope.
So.
I don't think Aaron has it. So we're not going to go into specifics.
Let's not fill our Twitch stream.
Let's not go into specifics. But like,
spoilers.
I feel like my general critique doesn't really contain any spoilers. It just contains expected extrapolations from the rest of the MCU.
Yeah, I mean, Infinity War was more of Marvel. It was just a lot of Marvel.
It was like Marvel squared.
Yeah,
It was
and
marvelous.
I mean, on one hand, I love that
just-
shit. That's my shit
yeah,
right there. But at the same time, like I wouldn't play that version of that thing as an RPG. Like
I wouldn't.
It doesn't do the
watch
thing.
it. I wouldn't watch it either. Like I watched it just because I knew everyone was going to be yelling about it a lot, and I wanted to critique from a position of information. Like it's in the same way. Like whenever people these days are like, "Hey, what's your favorite, Marvel or DC?" I'm like, neither. Get out of here. Go away. I'm gonna flash back to 1986 and read the first 30 issues of Hellblazer again. Go fuck yourself.
Some good stuff too. No, you
Like,
want to talk about?
that was some good shit.
You want to talk about some lasting consequences? There's some hard ass moves in that run of Hellblazer.
Yeah. All right. So to go back to the podcast thing, because I banged it in my head.
Bring it back.
And the idea of the Adventure Zone and Critical Role as pornography, right? RPG pornography. Like, yeah, hyper produced, super edited, not really bearing any resemblance to like real life play. Yeah, like that's super a thing. I think like Friends at the Table does better in that regard. That said, like if we imagine a spectrum from like, you know, the Adventure Zone to sitting down at a table and playing an actual RPG with your actual friends in real time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Friends at the Table is like in the middle, like leaning that end of the spectrum, but like it is still edited, right? Like it is still edited. And yeah, John, like Critical Role is live, but like it is mediated in a bunch of ways that make it very unlike play in usual context. But like, yeah, when I set out to produce a podcast, one of the things that was really important to me and to the rest of the cast was that when was that the words actual play be fucking meaningful, right? And that like what you see is basically what happened. Like maybe we cut out like coughing noises in the background and like shorten some pauses to make it less excruciating to listen to. But the like fundamentally, like unless we go really, really off track on a tangent for 5 minutes and we're like, this is actually just fucking meaningless to the game, like it is basically as we played it. Because that is important to me.
Pass 1, make sure all the auto tracks are the same. Lined up. Pass 2, auto cut out the pauses. Ship it.
Yeah, and if you have an episode where you only discuss Marvel Netflix's Iron Fist, ship that with the podcast, right, Mike? That's how we do.
I would love to get some critical feedback. Speaking of criticism, right, on like the stuff that we do, because like talking to all these wonderful people, I'm like, damn, like, are we doing a good job of this? Could we be doing this stuff better? Like, you know, and so yeah, that's lots of stuff that I have questions.
I do have a question that kind of brings a couple of things that we've just talked about together, actually. So
I realized I've been steamrollering this interview a little. I'm going to go back to like the you'll ask me questions mode because I think that will kind of be more interesting.
Here's the thing.
I want to talk.
We like it when you talk. That's why we had you on, right? It's fine. It's fine. This is great. Right?
But yeah, like I am interested to hear specific questions and respond to them because I think we will get a broader range of interesting content out of that than if I just like follow the nesty train of my brain as it goes wandering around.
Well, I will say this. We have several other interviewees that were like, we didn't talk about half of the stuff on our list, so You want to come back at some point? It's a thing that we do. We're not real. We as a group are not great at staying on topic either. The question I had was going back to sort of your critique of the content of a podcast or an actual play session as content, and how that fits in with like a system being played. Is the system itself being played meaningful content? Is understanding that system and watching that system in play be meaningful content, or is it about the characters and the people playing and the story they're telling? Is that the content that we want? Because Critical Role does that in a very different way than Friends of the Table does that in a very different way than, like, say we do, where you get warts and all the whole system. Like, I'm not sure, let's check page, whatever.
No, like for my money, the system is fucking integral. Like, I have everyone in chats like Luke's just getting grumpier, and it's like, yes, my like the hidden. Normally, I'm just sad and spooky and sincere, but the salt is rising. I like people who are like, oh, the system doesn't matter, or like, why don't you just play it with D&D? Like, nah, fuck off, go fuck yourself. Like,
you're not my supervisor.
Role-playing games. Observe. Role-playing games have game elements in them. Like, if you are not engaging with the mechanical, like, if you're not engaging with the mechanical elements of the game, and more importantly, if the game is not a well-designed game in which those mechanical elements support the kind of narrative it says it's about, right? Like, there's a whole thing here about, like, good design practice and good play practice. Like, games should be about the things they say they're about in the mechanics, and people playing them should fucking follow the rules, or they're not actually playing that game. And so, yes, long story short, the choice of system you are playing should matter to your actual play content, and you shouldn't hide the fact that you're playing a game and pretend that just out of thin air improvised narrative content is arising with no input from elsewhere. Or if that is what you're doing,
that's a soap opera,
which, like, that's valid. Stop pretending you're playing a role-playing game, that this is an actual play podcast, and just have an improvisational comedy or improvisational narrative podcast. Like, own the shit you're fucking doing. Don't play wishy-washy games, motherfuckers. All right, I'm done. I'm done with this topic.
No, see, I'm gonna rile you up all over again because I'm gonna say a thing. All right. Okay. So
I'm bracing myself.
It's not gonna be that bad. It's gonna be okay. I'm overselling it. Let's be real. The thing about that makes these games, and it's the same thing that makes, like, video game Twitch stream to a smaller degree, I think, so popular, is that the mechanics set the stakes for the thing that you're watching in a way that's sort of outside the hands of the people playing it, right? Like, this isn't a script that I'm like, okay, so at the end of this, Joyce dies, right? This is like, oh shit, you rolled a 4, Joyce died.
Yeah, no, like, totally.
Yeah. So I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge, at least while you're playing the games, is that, like, we don't have full control over this. We're going to sit here and we're going to riff on what these things are telling us happen. But something else is driving.
I am about to cite Paul Ksege. I believe it was Ksege. Came up with a principle some years ago where he was like, look, if you are the player who introduces an element into a game, complicates and or like fleshes out that element of the game and then resolves it in a game, is boring. Like, you are not going to have a good time because you're in control of the whole process. It is necessary that some part of the execution of that plot element, that narrative beat, like whatever the fuck it is, it's necessary that someone else or something else has, like, agency at some point in that process. I think one of the eternally slept upon insights in Apocalypse World is sometimes disclaim responsibility. Because if you never follow that GM principle, you will have a less interesting Apocalypse World MCing experience. Now,
Yeah.
not to a total extent, because like Apocalypse World is already a game that does a very good job at specifically disclaiming a bunch of responsibility to the mechanics,
Mm-hmm.
and then requiring that you follow through in certain ways that puts that out of your control. But like, my feeling is the more vectors on which you can do that, like the more parts of what is happening and unfolding are out of your personal control, as long as some of it still is, I think that's the ideal state.
Where your player experience is reactive, essentially, in a lot of ways.
Not even that it's reactive, but that like when I introduce a thing into the game, I'm not co-authoring, because I'm not solo authoring, because role-playing games are not an auteur. Like, the auteur model is just like complete horseshit in any kind of RPG space.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this is another thing that annoys me about the Adventure Zone. So, like, I, the GM, have, like, right, like, have planned and laid out and conceived of this elaborate narrative masterpiece. I'm like, great, go write a novel. Fuck off now. You don't want to play a role-playing game, you clearly want to write a novel, go do that.
Yeah. So on that exact point, when we started this podcast, I had run something for maybe 6 months before this. Like I was Baby Bird GM, and I came to our 4th edition thing with a fucking binder. I was like, this is everything that's going to happen. And then episode 1, they one-shot killed the big bad. And I got that binder and I threw it away, and I feel like everything I've run has been better for it since then.
Yeah, like there are a lot of memes about this, right? Like, no plan ever survives contact with your players. Like, it's a trope in the like culture of RPGs because it's fucking true. If you try and run auteur-style role-playing games, it won't work. The medium will fight you because fundamentally and inherently, that is not how the medium works. It's like if you tried... I'm trying to think of an analogy here. It's like if you tried to write a novel that does the things that like a novel is about with the format of a screenplay. You would end, like, inevitably, it would drift, and you would have a screenplay, but that would have a bunch of stuff in there about character motivation and character feelings and the internal life of your character that are not there in, like, the technical strict definition of what a screenplay is. Right? Because, like, you can't effectively tell a novel-style story without access to the inner world of the character. And so, like, you would be fighting the format. And so, I think... Yeah, like, I think anyone who is trying to, like, run auteur model Dungeons & Dragons, yeah, I'm not interested in it. I don't think it's good practice. John is right. I shouldn't be telling other people what to do. I just get really head up about it. And so, like, I feel like the logical extension of that is that, like, the more we acknowledge and we lean into the idea that this is a collaborative pursuit where, like, all various parties around the table and also the system, like, have input and shape the way that a given thing is expressed, like, that is good. That is us leaning into the strength of the hobby and playing to the strength of the, like, the form and the media that we have. And I think, like, that is how you produce good RPG, like, at a holistic level. Like, that's what good RPG content looks like. Many hands.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you could do... I mean, I haven't seen the Adventure Time Zone thing. I haven't. I watch stuff on the internet, and it's most of it's games. But like, I feel like I wind up in weird places that other people don't go. So, but I do think that you could do that thing where you like, this is the story we're going to tell, but like, you have to rehearse that shit ahead of time. Like, it can't be a surprise, and you can't leave it up to the dice in a lot of ways because you can run the auteur theory role-playing game.
As long as there's no dice involved, right?
Yeah.
Because
either you're going to be like constantly pulling on the reins to get it back in line, or everyone at the table is going to be miserable if they're not in on the joke too. And I don't know. I want, it's absolutely like their show to run. I think that one of the good things I want to highlight about like Critical Role and some of these bigger, more well-produced shows is they do get people interested in doing the thing, right?
Yes, like that is, I think, the argument that the one argument in favor of Dungeons and Dragons and Wizards of the Coast of the Company increasingly meddling in the Twitch space, the one argument I will hear in favor of it is that I do think fundamentally the like rising tide lifts all ships argument is a valid one, in that, the more people there are in the hobby, the more potential people there are to realize that D&D is boring and come buy my weird game about trees. Like, I'm on board with this. This is good. The more people I can introduce to Monster Hearts, the more people who can, like, learn about and, like, develop their appreciation for the really cool things that make tabletop role-playing games unique from and distinct from going to a cinema and, like, all of these other media forms.
Yeah. Okay, so we've been going for like an hour and a half. I guess that's my time estimate post glitch. Do we want to take a quick couple minutes for like a bio break, get some drinks, that sort of thing?
It sounds like a good plan.
Yeah.
I would also just like, before we break, to shout out, Ash has really, really clearly expressed a thing that that is part of my grumpiness in chat, which is that, like, the successful white dudes have less integrity in the content they're making than a bunch of the smaller people, but are getting more success. And like, that is frustrating, and that is annoying. And like, it's also the fucking way of it, right? In like, everywhere where fiction is being made in every fucking industry, it's the way of it. That doesn't stop me from being annoyed still. I'm still gonna be grumpy.
They're the Bon Jovi of actual play streaming, man. Like they're that popular, but they're also like that thing. So I have some questions. I'm interested to get your idea with some poking at the tide lifts all boats things when we come back, because
all right,
I think that's a rich vein.
Okay.
But
let's do it.
Let me get this image source added, and then we'll see if I can manage to not fuck it up. I didn't download it yet. Please hold. Yo, I'm so sorry. I'm just tired. Okay, I'm gonna mute us, and then we'll. So, for those of you at home, we will go on a brief hold. Just hum whatever music is most soothing to you, and we will return shortly. And we're back. I did that part of it, right?
Hello, internet.
I'm proud of you.
Awesome. Good work, Aaron. We are successfully back from the tube of spiders.
That's right. I found there's a book in there now too. Like it's a whole thing.
It's a whole thing.
Oh, it's a few spiders and some scorpions.
Yeah, he's called Barry. He's nice.
Nice.
He was buried
Okay.
way down the...
Oh. I'm so sorry.
He comes from the
so
Great Barrier Reef.
I want to. My plan here is to get you ranting again. So we're gonna start. We're gonna start with Critical Role and D&D and its place in the hobby. Okay. So I have, this is probably true of other folks that are even here talking, but I have something of a. I came into the hobby in kind of a weird way in that it was in like the late 80s, early 90s, but it was not D&D, right? I was not playing D&D right off. I was playing a bunch of stuff from Palladium. I was playing like Rifts and Palladium Fantasy and like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Robotech and stuff.
We have copies of those at work.
Yeah.
The parent of one of the kids like is of a similar space and like donated a bunch of his old stuff. So yeah, I've got a couple copies of like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles from like 1986, and I'm like, hey kids, you want to read a random thing in the library? Check this out.
I really love my TMNT and other strangenesses because those were like because we'd travel down like the local college town, and college kids would be like leaving for the summer. They needed gas money, so they'd sell it to the bookstore, and then it would just wind up in a pile, right? So over the summer, I would be like carving down that pile until I had them all with my like lawn mowing money. But so that and WEG Star Wars, Western Game Star Wars, were like the things that I got into playing RPGs with, and then I kind of got into D&D later. It wasn't too long, but it wasn't the first thing that I played, right? And it is, however, my experience in the hobby that D&D, Dungeons and Dragons, is a jealous mistress. If you are a D&D person, there's a very strong possibility that you are not going to be an anything else person. You are going to play D&D because there are just what you're used to. There's social pressures. There's a whole like learning new schema of these crazy ass story game things that exist, right? And so like I personally wonder a little bit, and I'm sure there's no hard numbers on this, like how many people. The idea that like all the rising tide lifts all boats. Yeah, Critical Role is bringing a bunch of people and they're like ilk are bringing a bunch of people into the hobby to play D&D. But not only is it D&D and therefore like really hard to get away from, but like they're putting in place all sorts of play structures that like keep dragging people back to D&D. So how much of an impact on the larger hobby is that going to have?
So at this point, I feel like I will also disclaim, like, we're starting to get beyond my, like, I have no professional level expertise in this. This is just, up till now, it's just been, like, me having personal opinions about this shit. Like, I'm not a content creator. Like, I participate in that stuff. And, like, I guess I have a podcast, so technically I am. But, like, I'm not, like, I'm not, like, an experienced content creator. And, like, I'm nowhere near as, like, thinking like really hard about this stuff as like Ashes, for instance, as someone who like runs like a stream herself. That said, what I will say is I will give credit here because like credit is absolutely due that both Matthew Mercer and the Critical Role crew and because these are the people that I've been shitting on, like I'm gonna counterbalance that, right? And the Adventure Zone crew are both really good, both one about recommending other games and boosting the existence of other games to their large audiences. And also, they have, like, both of them have extensive fan bases, and they're also putting their money where their mouth is. In that, like, you know, like, apparently, like, sales of Honey Heist, for instance, which the Crit Role crew played, like, a one-shot, like, fucking, like massive numbers spike of sales of that. We know that, like, you know, like, the Adventure Zone, like, there are Powered by the Apocalypse games in physical print in my friendly local game shop now, and there were not at any other point in my life. And the game is Monster of the Week, and I will stake fucking $50 that the causal factor there is the success of the Adventure Zone. Like, Matthew Mercer himself, like going over onto the channel of like other content creators, like he did recently with Blue Jay, and like playing in a game of Dungeon World, and a bunch of his audience going with him and seeing that Dungeon World exists and is a game that exists and is good and you can play and that is not D&D. And like, so I think, I mean, look, I have some quibbles from a design standpoint with Dungeon World on that very point, but I'm not going to get into that particular.
We'll come back. We'll come back to it. It'll be fine.
I've already had that rant in the last couple of days. That's not territory I'm going to reach. But yeah, I feel like it is very much the case that a lot of these people are lifting all ships, and even even wizards.
Mm-hmm.
Who like, yeah, so my other problem, right? Like the other quibble I have with both Critical Role and Wizards' involvement is that they're massively skewing the shape of the whole thing by putting Hollywood, by putting actual fucking money into it.
Yeah.
Like anytime anyone talks about numbers and most popular like streaming and like content creation stuff, I feel like at a statistical, I genuinely feel at a statistical level, Critical Role is an outlier and should not be counted. And I know it's the form of a meme, but I do mean it because Critical Role are fucking Geek and Sundry is owned by a Hollywood production company.
Yeah.
And Critical Role has actual fucking Hollywood no shit advertising money.
Mm-hmm.
And so they, as a data point, nothing meaningful can be gathered from that because it's not part of the current overall picture and there's nothing really to compare it against. And I feel like Wizards is kind of in a similar space in that they've got actual corporation money.
Yeah.
But still, on Wizards, for instance, one of the people that Wizards has worked with and bought into their conglomerate is the Roll20 Presents crew, who, in addition to playing Dungeons and Dragons, play other games and are not shy about talking about that or directing people to those other places. And if you follow them for long enough, hopefully inevitably you will follow Andrew over and discover Girl by Moonlight. And so even Wizards who are most quote unquote at fault in this pushing of the only D&D forever side of things. Even Wizards and their occupying territory in Twitch streaming, I think, is not without channels and avenues that lead back into other games.
Okay.
So on the whole, yeah, I would say I am hopeful that a rising tide will lift all boats.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to echo the idea that speaking as someone who has been in this hobby sort of at least at the edges for quite a while, we're definitely living in a golden age of people making cool stuff, right? That's sort of, and it's not D&D sized because nothing's D&D sized, right? But it's cool people are making really cool things that I really want to play. We were just talking about how our backlog continually grows as we find out about all these things, and now we're going to play trees on ships or something. I don't know how that works.
No, those are different games.
If you mix and match them, you're doing it wrong.
Can we build ships out of the trees?
That's fucked up.
Oh, that's out of you.
But you could tie the universes together. It'd be continuity.
I mean, look, I have joked. I'm the person who's joked before about a game where you're cool, we're gonna play Apocalypse World, and then we're gonna play Legacy, Life Beyond the Ruins, and then we're gonna play Dungeon World and do some late Terry Brooks post-modern apocalyptic fantasy shit, and then we're gonna play to a fantasy apocalypse in our Dungeon World game, and then we're gonna play Apocalypse World Fallen Empires. I've made that joke before, so if y'all want to chain games together in some totally absurd logic cause way where you're cool, we're gonna play the tree game, and then we're gonna play a Dungeon World campaign set in the forest that we created using the tree game, and then we're gonna do a different thing, and then our characters are gonna go to sea and we're gonna play across the endless sea. I'm down. Do it with my blessing.
That's actually funny because one of the things that when we were talking about getting back into D&D as a thing that we played on the Twitch stream, it's in our name, right? That D&D podcast. But for a long time, we were like mostly a Blades in the Dark podcast. The the one of the things I joked about doing was like starting all the way back at like Chainmail or Moldvay and doing like a generational D&D game as we moved forward, right? Which I thought would be funny.
But here's my question. How would you cope with 3rd edition?
Gas
Would
leak?
you not
Gas
come
leak
to
scenario?
a screeching halt? And also, secondary query, after you left 3.5, would you pursue the 4th edition or the Pathfinder chain in the D&D evolution tree?
Okay.
I think I feel relatively confident in saying that we would go to 4th edition.
But then from there, would you go to 13th Age or would you go to 5th edition, right? Like,
yeah,
because I love the game. We now exist in a space where the Dungeons and Dragons evolutionary tree includes a bunch of games that aren't D&D. Like,
so
we've reached
so
that
great.
point. Or even like from 2nd edition, would you even go to 3rd? Would you go to like one of the like 1,010,000
OSRs,
which are all basically 2.5? Like
we have a there's a mild disagreement. The individual that did our overlay, who's not here, where I will refer to 13th Age as a different edition of D&D. And he's
absolutely.
like, no, that's just another D&D. It's not an edition. The word edition means a thing. And so like it's interesting. We have this whole ecosystem of that weird like D&D style fantasy, because fantasy isn't D&D. D&D is its own thing, right? But we now have like dozens of games that do that specific thing. And it's a trip. It's a trip.
I have a bunch of like English literary major feelings about D&D as genre and the impact it has had on the wider fantasy genre, but like I feel like that would be going down a rabbit hole and a half. So like,
but I kind of want to ask that question now.
okay, I'll give you the cliff notes so we can follow up later. Basically, there is an ever since we reached the point where a bunch of fantasy authors are people who played D&D as kids and as teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like that was a watershed moment. We hit it in like, I want to say the early 2000s, but I don't actually like have figures. I read a paper on this like once fucking 5 years ago and part of my degree. But like there is an identifiable moment at which that happens, and like a critical mass of these people enter fantasy publishing. And there is a very demonstrable change in the way that magic is presented and magic is written.
Mm-hmm.
Because all of those people grew up with a game in which, strong opinion, sorry, there isn't magic, there's just sufficiently advanced technology. Like magic in D&D is science, all of it, because of the mechanical way that they structure it. And so whenever I hear anyone cite Brandon Sanderson's first law, whichever the one is about you can either have magic as a plot-solving thing, or you can have it to add a sense of mystery, but you can't do both because they're incompatible. One, Brandon, that's horse shit. Two, I think there is a very observable shift from the latter to the former as this wave of people who are used to thinking of magic as a tool that your characters use to solve problems that must therefore work in predictable ways. Like, as the D&D generation enter the hobby, like, you can watch that happen. Not the hobby, the genre. Like, you can watch that happen in fantasy, like, overall and in a very broad sense. Like, of course, there's always exceptions. And I also feel like, because I have a fairly distinct memory that Brandon Sanderson is part of that D&D generation.
Yeah.
And I wonder if the entire framing of Sanderson's first lore isn't in part informed by a bunch of internalized assumptions that D&D gave him about how magic needs to work in order to be a thing that you can solve problems with.
I would agree with that. Yeah. I think that's a fair point for sure. Yeah, that is a really interesting idea, though, that how deeply D&D has informed the way fantasy looks. Yeah.
Well, and like, The other specific instance I find really interesting, I apologize for cutting you off, is that we talk a lot about fantasy being massively in Tolkien's shadow, and yet observe that actually, if you look at the state of the play of modern fantasy for the last 15 years, the like stereotypical idea of what an elf looks like, stereotypical idea of a dwarf looks like, those things actually are far more true to the way that Dungeons and Dragons conceives of those things than of the way that they are actually presented in The Lord of the Rings if you read it.
Yeah.
And even further, if you look at the way that those things are represented in the films.
Yeah.
Right? Like the dwarf, like Peter Jackson's like dwarves borrow from D&D dwarves in a bunch of places that are not consistent with Tolkien's dwarves in a really interesting way. And like, I think the cultural impact of Dungeons and Dragons on fantasy and like the weird gravity well effect it has had is like very, very interesting to me as a person who reads fantasy novels. And as a designer, when I design fantasy games, I'm always like, cool, let's stake out territory as far away from the gravity well as possible because I don't care for it.
Yeah, clawing out a niche somewhere over there where there aren't like...
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, that is... I mean, I also think, coming back to kind of my own experiences, one of the things that Mike and I talk about Star Wars a fair amount for various reasons, not least of which because we played Star Wars together. And over the years, I have spent vastly more time playing Star Wars RPGs than I have consuming like projected Star Wars media. Like people telling me about Star Wars is a far more rare experience than me doing Star Wars. And so that informs sort of my relationship with it, I think, in a pretty foundational way. And this is the same way with the dwarves. Like dwarves and elves are the way they are because so many of us did that for so long, right? Or like vampires now. Like you look at the supernatural stuff and it has rules that look an awful lot like a certain brand of role-playing game. Yep.
But which, like, in turn got it from Anne Reese.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Directly.
I think Ash and I had this conversation. Ash had this like months and months back. I like flash back to a conversation about like the evolutionary biology, like the evolutionary representation biology of fantasy tropes.
Okay.
And how like there's a weird split in the orcish line that happens somewhere in the like 80s.
Okay.
Where orcs fracture into D&D orcs, Tolkien orcs, and Warhammer / Warcraft orcs.
Okay.
Which are like distinct phylogenetic lines, and like have never since like crossed back into one another, really. Like your orcs are a take on either one of those things. But like there hasn't been a super, like, no one has clawed out a fourth one really distinctly yet, and none of those games have wandered into each other's spaces yet. And it's really interesting that, like, that's just, become a fixed thing. The ecosystem of tropes within a genre is super interesting. And to bring it back, one of the reasons that I feel like genre is a useless tool. Because if I say, it's this a fantasy game with orcs and dwarves and elves and shit.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of orcs? Yeah. What kind of dwarves?
Which parts of the evolutionary line am I talking about? What assumptions am I making? Right?
Yeah.
It's not a useful tool actually in discussion. It just is a like flattening and homogenizing one.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes.
Sorry. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Because you still have, no matter what genre you're talking about, you still have to go down, and talk about the specific details you want to frame and front foot. Like we were talking with Andrew when they were on about westerns and how you say western to two different people. Because I grew up in like the Unforgiven westerns, but like my dad loved westerns too. He loves the cavalryman western, and those are very, very different things that share like only the most basic coat of paint over the top.
And so, like if we imagine a world where you and your dad are both tabletop role-playing game players, right?
Mhm.
And we say to you, cool, do you want to play Dogs in the Vineyard? It's a Western game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? Like that is a true, like that is an accurate, it's an accurate statement, but also it is accurate to your experience of the genre in a way that it definitely is not to your dad's. Because you go into Dogs in the Vineyard expecting like the early, uncritical, naive expression of the Western genre. Oh shit, you are going to have a time.
Yeah, white hats and bugles do not come in this game. They're not here.
Yeah, and so, like increasingly I just like, as a designer, as a marketer of my games and of other games, right? Because like, ultimately when we're trying to get role-playing games, people to play role-playing games with us, we're marketers because we're saying, like, here is why you should play this game with me. And as a GM, and a player, when having like palette setting conversations at the start of games, I like genre is just like, it's just not helpful. It doesn't actually do any productive load bearing work. It just delays the start of the productive work.
Oh, well.
What?
I'm
sorry, I cut in for a second.
Go for it.
So,
Go for it, Mike.
Because you mentioned the way that you market your games, I think was the word. And on your itch.io page, you have these really great one-sentence descriptions a lot of these products. And they do so without including genre. So like Endless Sea is, or Across the Endless Sea is a story game about fantastical sea voyages. And that I feel, it seems to me, without having yet played the game, we'll have to add to the backlog, that it is evocative of both what it's about without being that flattening concept. Actually, I somehow want to turn that into a better question. Like, could you tell me about, like, Zach has better words than me.
About that, like that process?
Yeah, because...
So this goes back to the like local gaming culture stuff. Because like if we look at my like life in role-playing games, right? There's 3 distinct DNA strands in it. And one of them is my work and that whole thing. And one of them is indie RPGs and like my like post-apocalypse world life. And then there is the third one, which is my local convention. Because Canberra, where I live, gentle viewers, is home to Australia's oldest indie role-playing convention. That is still like extant. It turns like 26. It's like fucking old, right?
Wow.
Like, and the really interesting thing about this that I can link you all some reading materials if at any point like what I'm saying starts to get interesting. Australia was never like, we never had trade show cons until like the mid 2000s. Because like imagine flashback, it's 1983 in Australia. Who the fuck is going to spend the money on running like what company is going to invest in a trade show con? Like how much of a return are you going to fucking make, right? And so like we just never, like the whole like Gen Con, like we just skipped that whole stage. And so instead our like our Go Play Northwest started in 1984 and has been running continuously ever since and was part of like an ecosystem of such cons. So we had like 3 or 4 cons where people showed up with custom games they had written, often with custom systems that were like really targeted, precise one-shots that did only like really like one, they were like very specific and that will run 11 times and then never run again. Like people write boutique indie role-playing, like one-shot indie role-playing games, run them 11 times, and then that game just disappears. And every year, like 30 people do this.
Okay.
And that is how those cons... It's like... It's mind-blowing whenever I stop and I critically examine it. I'm just like, the fuck are we doing? Like... And there is a reason that I've now started going back to the ones that I've written in previous years and publishing them, because I'm like, no, I will not let this mandala of sand blow away in the wind. I won't let it happen. And so part of this is a thing that you necessarily learn in this culture is how to pitch games. Because I got to write a blurb for my game, right? To go up on the website so that people will sign up to play my game. And there's a whole bunch of best practice and accumulated knowledge of how to do that, because we've been doing it for fucking however long, like 25 long, like however many years. And key parts of that are like, one, there is a truism that is very accurate, which is that like, if you are a known designer, it doesn't actually matter what your blurb is. There is a very well-known member of the local scene who's been in it for like fucking 25 odd years or something, called Andrew. And one year, his blurb on the website was name of game, and it, like the Mustard Court, or something. I don't fucking remember what it was. Andrew Smith will run a game. Full stop. That was it. That was the blurb. And he booked out. Because people knew who he was by this point, and they were like, yeah, Andrew's gonna run a thing, it'll be good. I'm gonna sign up for that.
Nice.
And so like, your blurb is not aimed at people, at least in this context, it's not totally a 1-for-1 ratio. Like, your game is not aimed at your blurb is not aimed at people who know who you are. People who know me and have played my games before will play or not play my game on the strength of, did I enjoy Luke's game last year, the year before, and the year before that? Not, what is the specific blurb for this one? Your blurb is aimed at people who've never played one of your games before, who are the people on the fence. And the more important thing for your blurb to do is to signal what your game is not. Like, it is more important to not have a person who, like, is really not interested in the thing you're doing and is not going to have a good time. Like, having that person end up is more of a failure of your blurb than if you get a bunch of people who are mildly interested but no super fans. Because on the balance, the thing that will, like, cause more people to have a bad gaming experience is if someone walks into a, like, cathartic, relationship-based, like, halfway to Parlalop, like, super serious thematic triptych game expecting Dungeons and Dragons, right? That's the thing that, like, is going to spoil the session for everyone. And so you gotta write specifically and be really clear about what you are so that people know if they're into it or not. And if they're not, they can be like, I'm not into that.
Yeah.
And so a key art in that, because the other thing I learned is that the key question that you always get, because we have a thing called Blurbsmas. It happens in January because of the ecological cycle of, like, game submissions, right? Blurbsmas happens in about January because game blurbs have to be finalized by the 23rd of January. And so in Blurbsmas, you all hop onto, like, the Fenno Facebook page and we, like, trade, like, draft blurbs with each other and start critiquing. And the universal question is, okay, but what do people actually do in this game? Because so often people write these really high concept and it's got great evocative language, but it's like, but what do we do? What's it about? What happens? Right? Shipwreckers is a role-playing game about one night and one wreck in the lives of a crew of shipwreckers in 1780s Cornwall. Across the Endless Sea is a systemless role-playing game about a fantastical sea voyage. Right? You gotta answer that fucking question. And if you don't know that, and if you don't know the answer, you can't design effectively. Right? Like, if I were giving game design advice, like, figure out the fucking answer to that question, for the love of God. And don't, like Dungeons and Dragons did, figure out the answer to that question, then proceed to pretend that the game was about a thing, right? Like, what is Dungeons and Dragons about, right? A bunch of adventurers go into a dungeon and kill a bunch of things and get a bunch of money. But they really disingenuously pretend that's not what it's about. But so yeah, the things I learned about blurb writing, right, were like, be really clear about what you are and what you aren't, and like write a really strong, like, here is what you actually fucking do in this game. And once again, in neither of those points are genre like buzzwords useful. And so, like, similarly, every one of the other recurring pieces of feedback you see in Blurbsmas is, but what does that mean? But what does that mean? Well, what does that mean? You said system, PBTA. What the fuck is that? A bunch of people aren't going to know what that means. You said system, you know, like Australian systemless convention style. What is that? Explain that. A bunch of people aren't going to know what that means.
Yeah.
You said low fantasy. What do you mean? What do you actually mean? Because unless you are clear about what you actually mean, you're not communicating specifically what your game is about so people can figure out if they're into it or not.
That makes sense.
Okay.
That is the great revelation I got from con culture, or one of them. Anyway.
Are your games that are up on your Shield page to be sold? Are those things that you've run through that system?
The one of them that is a game from that con system is As Blossoms Fall, which is I think the most recent of them. Because the other thing about the con culture here is that we have a very, very specific. There's a whole, in the same way that like Jeep form and like Nordic LARP exists, right? Like there is a whole like weird esoteric its own thing, like local culture of play, and local culture of design, and so like a lot of turning As Blossoms Fall into a thing that people who are not me or friends of mine also in this community could run was me being like, fuck, what are the distinguishing traits of this style? How do I express what the point is to people who just have no experience of it?
Mm-hmm.
How do I explain why we do the things that we do? How do I turn that into actionable content? Because like, and I talked about this with a friend recently. We don't do. And look, like any absolute statement, this is not actually true, right? Like, there are always exceptions. Like, it is true that mostly this was the way of things, but even now, like, some people will still show up and run a session of Dungeon World. Like, that's still a thing. But, like, 90% of the games at the con are original. And, like, the core, like, style that distinguishes it is one that doesn't give a fuck about plot, doesn't give a fuck about narrative, doesn't give a plot about story, like all those buzzwords that we use to don't give a shit. The thing that makes those games interesting is the experience of two human beings, the magic that you get when play and role-playing is enlivened by the empathy, chemistry, connection that actual human beings have with one another. And so the pre-written part of these games, the bit that is really carefully considered and really like heavily like quote unquote scripted or like whatever the fuck you put it, is the characters. You get handed, right? Like we design really, really thoughtfully constructed pre-generated characters, and the purpose is for you to inhabit them and experience their relationships and the dynamics between them and the magic that's given by the fact that there's other human beings playing them.
Okay.
And the plot, such as it is, and the story, and like all of those things are just the box in which that interaction happens. But that interaction is what it's about.
Okay.
And so it was the question of like, how do I express that? How do I make that actionable? How do I explain why that's a good thing? Like all of that labor, I was like, I need to do all of that in order to sell this game. Because if I just give you this game and then your players are like, all right, like there's things on this character, but like I'm just gonna make up a bunch of shit and I get that this module is meant to be like a module about feelings or whatever, but like I'm just gonna try and like solve the problem D&D style. Like if you do those things, one, you're not playing my game in good faith, and two, like you're just not gonna have a good experience because the game is not designed for any of those things. Like they're very specifically curated experiences that are halfway towards like LARP, like parlor LARP, even at the same time as being like tabletop games. It's a very particular, distinctive thing, which is why it's taken me so long to turn any of it into saleable product.
Yeah.
That's fair.
So you have like character-driven visionettes of like a thing. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Actually, that's
so
really
like,
cool.
So like, As Blossoms Fall, for instance, is a game set in Japan, in a valley occupied by multiple like tribal clan groups who are on the brink of war over control of a valuable dam that keeps back the river that like could flood the valley. And the game happens over the course of like 12 hours, maybe, like probably 6. And it's like the scenes are, it's got 3 scenes, this game. Spoilers for anyone who wants to play it, but I'll try and minimize them. It's like scene. The high priest of the god of storms in the valley is dead, and now no one is in charge of the dam anymore. You'll go to the funeral. Scene.
Okay.
And you interact with one another, but in a way that is like super prescribed and super like surveilled, because like all of your clans are watching and you're very much yourselves as public figures, and you really feel that scrutiny. Scene 2. All of you sit vigil over the high priest's body. It is completely private. Up to the point where the GM, who has been playing the clans and like being the locus of surveillance, leaves the room.
Okay.
Huh.
Like I would go and take a 20-minute coffee break at the beginning of the second act every session
Nice.
to let them get that rhythm and feel that privacy before I then came back in and started spying on them and like taking notes. Third act. A really abrupt bad thing happens that makes a bunch of these characters make a bunch of irrevocable decisions about their relationships.
Mm.
And I'm not going to tell you what that is because that's a spoiler. But like that's the game. That's all it is. It's just like you interact with one another for 3 hours in character. That's it. That's the game. Like
I really dig that.
yeah, and so like that
That's
is
cool.
how we do it locally. And so yeah, turning that into something that is GMable by other people and makes sense to other
That's
people is
true.
like really tricky.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm being so slow. And also, like, my first convention module, I won an award for. I won the Best New Designer Award, as voted by the people who played at the con, which is like 10 points to me. It wasn't a very good game. Like, in hindsight, I can admit, and particularly at the level of like, it was much more about the plot stuff because I hadn't really dug into like the catharsis is good side of things yet. It's like it wasn't super about the plots. It was about relationships, but not so much about feelings. And like the system of it, like was I just look back on and this is bad. So like that one, I'm never gonna do. Right? Like I'm just never gonna adapt that because it doesn't need to. Like that was an experiment and it happened. And people enjoyed it, and I had a good time at the time, and I learned a bunch of things, but, like, no one needs to see that.
Yeah.
But so, like, it's just that question of also, of, like, which of my con games are actually worthwhile putting up there with, like, a bunch of stuff I've written, like, in the last year.
Yeah.
At a, like, much, like, more mature point in my design career.
Right.
Like, which of them can stand up to it, right? Because I don't want to just like throw a bunch of time into not only just the like adapting it for other people to run it, like all of that stuff, but also then having to rewrite the game to be good. Like in the amount of time it takes to do all of that labor, I could just fucking write 2 new games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm not going to do it. So it's like the question is like, is this game good enough as it stands that like it doesn't need to be rewritten? If so, then it gets adapted.
Yeah.
Nice.
So on this side of the world, it's I think it's getting a little bit late, and my caffeine is rapidly leaving my body. So I think, unfortunately, what we're gonna have to do is probably call it here for tonight. But first off, we would absolutely love to have you back another time for more shenanigans and diversions and discourse. That's what D&D is for us.
Yeah, diversions and discourse, a role-playing game.
But I didn't get to my question about is D&D a meaningful genre?
Don't, Zach.
No.
So before we leave, first off, why don't you plug your things?
I'm gonna plug all my things.
Yes.
Cool. Okay, so let me do the great shilling. If you would like to buy any of my games and see what we are talking about here, you can find them at gamesfromthewildwood.itch.io. Many of them are like small micro games and like don't cost a lot and are like one session to run. So they're very good if you just want to try a weird indie game out. If you would like to see games that I am working on in the present tense, and / or see past design stuff on games I have already published, you can see all that at my Patreon at patreon.com/gamesfromthewildwood, which I am normally pretty good about updating regularly, though recently I was sick and I had a bunch of work stuff, so I haven't been good about that. So that is a place you can also check out. I have a big game that I am writing. Like I've got all these like little games, and I'm just like, I'm going to write a weird micro game about this thing. I also have like a full scale Powered by the Apocalypse game.
Okay.
That's also about a really weird niche thing. That is like in the final stages of getting ready for public playtest, probably.
Okay.
Cool.
So like, if the idea of low folkloric fantasy focused on exploration and discovery and like getting really deep dive into the fiction in a world haunted by wild magic and its history, but that doesn't replicate all the weird colonialist vibes of West Marches type games. If a game that is that thing interests you, or if interesting settings grounded in East Asian, it's like Chinese and Japanese and Ainu and Tibetan mythology and culture interest you, or if Powered by the Apocalypse games that are fantasy that aren't Dungeon World interest you, follow my Twitter, and like, yeah, probably within a month, but like we'll see, that public playtest will be coming out. Also, as we kind of like talked around, I have a podcast. It is called Feelings First. It's an actual play podcast focused on queer representation, fiction first gaming, and intimate stories. It's about characters and the relationships between them and treating those characters with dignity and compassion, even when they're shitty teens. And at the moment, we are playing Monster Hearts. You can find us on Twitter at feelingsfirst_. I think
Mike's Googling it right now.
Yeah, I think that's all of my shilling. I can't. If you would like to see me play role-playing games, you should check out Ash's Twitch channel. If you would like to see me run role-playing games, I am currently running Indie Heartbreaker, like 2005 Indie Heartbreaker The Mountain Witch, over on Eric Vulgaris' channel.
Yeah.
And that is a time. If you want to see my feelings about that game, check out my Twitch. I did a GM prep stream where I yelled about the game's design a lot. And I think I'm done. I think I'm done. That's all my shilling. I would like to shill a non-capitalist thing.
I was actually, I was about to say, I really liked doing that on Ash's session, and
I'm really into it.
Yeah, no, I'm super into it. You do it. Go for it.
Yeah. So the non-capitalist thing, I'd like to plug 2 non-capitalist things today. Number 1, I would like to plug playing role-playing games with your friends, like as a way to like keep company with one another and spend time with another and like develop your relationships and add new dimensions to it. Like, I've talked a lot of smack about the way people play games and certain people and the way they play games and the impact of it, but like, all I really want you to do is go out and find a game that is about a thing that you give a shit about and play that game with some other cool people who give a shit about that thing. The other thing I would like to recommend is taking time to be in nature.
Okay.
And just like experience the weather and like look at the trees and listen to the natural world and just like let yourself be in that moment.
Venomous garden snakes.
It's part of the natural world.
Accept them for what they are and where they are.
And how delicious they are.
Their venom is
Potentially.
valid. Venom is valid.
That venom is valid.
So I guess I'll do our spiel, and then also the three of us can do our non-capitalist thing, which seems weird to jump back and forth, but hey, that's kind of the theme for tonight, is jumping around a little bit. So we're just keeping on brand. And there comes the hiccups. If you're watching this live, well, then you already know we are at twitch.tv/thatdnd podcast. You can go to thatdndpodcast.com, that D&D podcast on Twitter, YouTube, for all of our audio and video libraries, I guess, let's say. John Harper has begun sharing our Patreon, so I'm going to do it as well. So if you go to patreon.com/thatdnd podcast, if you feel inclined to give us money, you can do that thing, I guess. Yeah. I think that's all of our things. And non-capitalist plugs, I have two. Number one is just in general, make time to spend time with people who are important to you, regardless of how you do it. Whether it be eating dinner together or going to a movie or anything like that. Just letting somebody know that they are worth your time is big. And number two, let somebody who creates something that you like, let them know that you like the thing. You never know how they're doing that day, and sometimes just, hey, I appreciate this thing you created, and it's great, and it brightened my day, or helped me change the way I look at things, or whatever it did specifically. Just let that person know, and you might not ever get a message back from them, but that's fine. You put a little bit of good out into the world, so sometimes that's all you can do.
John, I really like Blades in the Dark. It's a very good game.
How dare you?
Thank you. We got a captive audience. We got to take advantage.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who goes next. Is that Zach?
Yeah, which direction are we passing here?
Do intro order, Zach.
Yep, go Zach first.
Okay, cool. Non-capitalist shout-outs. That's really interesting. I have a 2-year-old, or just about 2-year-old. I think it turns 2 in like 3 days. If you've got kids, spend time outside with your kids. We found a snake the other day, and it was the coolest thing. Not a poisonous snake. We don't live near poisonous snakes. But we found a snake outside, and he got to see his first dragon, and he was simultaneously terrified and deeply intrigued by it. So that was a fun moment. So if you've got kids, or you have access to kids, like legit access though, like legit access to kids.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Go spend some time outside with them. It's
As
awesome.
a childcare professional, I would like to say, please don't kidnap children.
Yes. No. I feel like, yeah, they're going to take my teaching certificate if I'm like, yes, please find a child, take the child,
Any child,
and put the child in nature. It'll be amazing.
Take them out to the Florida wetlands and just like dump them in and see what happens.
Find a garden with a scorpion in it. Put the kid in the scorpion garden.
Man versus wild toddler edition.
Please don't do this. Please.
Would
Yeah,
you
the
rather
other
fight one child-sized scorpion, or
one scorpion leave, two scorpions enter. Well, one child and one scorpion enter. One scorpion leaves.
I would rather fight one child-sized scorpion than like fucking 1,000 scorpion-sized children. Like,
true. That's fair.
The child-sized scorpion would be much more manageable.
Also, like, morally, just killing one scorpion would be way easier than 1,000 children.
Exactly.
We're taking stances.
Having a wave of children try to like harm you just seems like it would be psychologically like damaging long term. Whereas a scorpion, it's just
50-pound scorpion wouldn't be.
But I mean, on the flip side, Aaron, you just described my day job. So like,
okay, fair. And I mean, that was my day today on a field trip. So
all the children at the program are this big. The tables are very low.
Fun fact. Some Gulliver's Travel type shit.
I feel like I've done mine. Right, go ahead.
Just be lovely people, do good things. bring love into this world and goodness and kindness. So
That works. So yeah, once again, we have been that D&D podcast. This has been our improbable interview, and Luke has been a lovely human being as always.
thank you.
Yes,
Thanks for coming on, Luke.
Thank you for coming on. Thank you to those of you in chat for helping provide some lively conversation topics, and for keeping the debate going off stream too. Like I appreciate that sort of stuff. Anyway, I'm rambling again, so I'm going to hit the end stream button. So good night. I love you all.
Good night, Internet.